You have been ashamed of the shape your help arrived in. I have watched you turn it away, more than once quietly, without ever calling it what it actually was. Rescue that did not come dressed the way you had already decided rescue was supposed to look. I have listened to you apologize, to yourself if not to me, for needing something you could not have produced with your own two hands. Before this message ends, I want you to understand why I have such a long history of sending exactly what you would never have picked out on your own. I have watched you decline the ride because accepting it felt like losing something you were not willing to name out loud. I have watched you leave the envelope sitting on the counter for 3 days before you let yourself open it, as though opening it too quickly would prove you needed it more than you wanted anyone to know. I have watched you check the account at the kitchen table under the one lamp that still works, doing the math twice, in case the first answer had been wrong, and telling no one which number you actually landed on. I have heard you thank people through gritted teeth for things you privately resented needing. None of that was pride, the way you have kept calling it pride when you think about it at all. It was a rule. And I want to name the rule plainly before we go any further, because you built it a long time ago, and you have been living under it ever since. Help only counts, in your private accounting, if it arrives looking like something you would have picked out yourself. The single parent counting out the last few days before payday twice just to be sure has done this. The caregiver who cannot remember the last time anyone asked how she was holding up has done this. The one who lost the position that used to define the whole shape of his week has done this. Sitting in a parked car a little longer than the errand required, not ready yet to walk back inside and perform steadiness for people who are counting on him. The son quietly covering a parent's bill without ever mentioning it, and flinching every time someone offers to cover his, has done this too. Different rooms, different reasons. The exact same private rule running underneath every one of them. Here is what almost no one around you has noticed, because you have gotten so good at hiding it. It is not only the receiving that costs you, it is the waiting before the receiving. The long stretch where you're doing everything right, exactly what I asked, and the help has not come yet. And some quiet part of you starts to wonder whether obedience simply forgot to pay you back this time. You have done the hard, unglamorous thing. You have kept the appointment. You have made the call you did not want to make. You have held your tongue when you had every right to raise it. You have shown up again to a place that costs you more than it visibly gives back, and you have done all of it without an audience. No one is timing how long you have been in the hiding place, no one but me. And underneath the waiting, there is a quieter fear you have not said out loud to anyone. Maybe not even to yourself in plain words. That asking again means you're becoming a burden. That the first time I helped you was grace, and the second time was patience wearing thin, and by the 5th or the 50th time, you are certain you have used up some limited supply of goodwill I keep somewhere and will not refill. So you have started rationing your own requests the way you would ration water you were sure was running low, asking for less than you need, thanking too quickly, moving on before the moment could turn into anything that felt like dependence. I do not keep that kind of ledger. I never have. There is no 5th time that costs me more than the 1st. Let me tell you about a man I once told to disappear. His name matters less than what happened to him next. So, hold it loosely for a moment. I told him to leave everything familiar and go sit beside a shrinking stream, tucked into a ravine no search party would think to check, and wait there until I said otherwise. Then I did the strangest thing. I did not send a friend to feed him. I did not send an angel with a basket, the way you might have pictured it if I had let you write the story yourself. I sent ravens, a bird that will pick a battlefield clean, a bird that every list of clean and unclean creatures in his culture would have told him to keep his distance from. Twice a day, morning and evening, that distrusted, unglamorous bird arrived with exactly what he needed, carried in its beak, dropped it near his feet, and left again without waiting to be thanked. Think for a moment about what that choice actually means, because it is not a small detail. I did not run out of better options. I have wind and fire and 100 servants at my command who would have looked far more dignified doing that particular task. I chose the creature he would have been embarrassed to be seen depending on, because the point was never his dignity. The point was that he eat. I would rather have you alive and fed by something you find humiliating than proud and hungry, still waiting on a rescue that finally matches your taste. That was true for a frightened man hiding in a ravine a very long time ago. It has not stopped being true for you. Somewhere back in your own history, you built the private rule I named a moment ago, and you built it out of real material. A season when the help that came was clumsy, or came with strings attached, or came from someone who later used it against you, or arrived so late it felt more like an insult than a rescue. I understand exactly how a rule like that gets made. I am not asking you to pretend the season that made it did not hurt, but the rule outgrew the season that produced it. It quietly widened year by year until it covered almost everything you were offered. Until any help that did not look clean, well-timed, and delivered by someone you already fully trusted got filed under suspicious instead of under provided. You have been going without rather than risk accepting something shaped wrong, and I have been watching you go without, grieved, because the thing you were refusing, more times than you know, was mine. Some of you know exactly what I mean by shaped wrong. The co-worker you barely trusted, who left something in your bag with no note attached, and you spent longer wondering what she wanted from you than you spent being grateful. A stranger's small kindness arriving on precisely the hardest afternoon of that week, which you waved off with a joke because sincerity felt too exposed to sit with in that moment. You have gotten so used to needing help to arrive a certain way, competent, familiar, symmetrical, easy to repay in kind, that when it comes wearing any other shape, your first instinct is to check it for a hidden cost instead of simply receiving it. Some of you know it from the other direction. The widow next door, who quietly mowed your lawn the week you were living at the hospital, and you spent that whole week trying to figure out how to pay her back instead of simply letting the grass stay cut. Someone signed up for a slot on the meal train you never filled in yourself, and a dish showed up on your porch from a name you barely recognized, and your first thought was not gratitude. It was the sharp discomfort of owing something you had not agreed to owe. And some of you are living through the second half of this, the part almost no one talks about openly, which is what happens when the very source you had learned to lean on finally thins out. The steady work that once felt like solid ground under you, cutting your hours down to almost nothing you can count on. The routine you built your whole week around, a person who used to check in without fail, a paycheck that used to stretch further than it does now. A season of steady health you had quietly assumed would simply continue, narrowing the way a stream narrows across a summer with no rain, until one ordinary morning you go to it out of habit and find almost nothing where the water used to run. You have read that thinning as the ending of the story, as though the drying up were me stepping back, or worse, me finally changing my mind about you. Here is the reframe I have been carrying toward you this whole time. Say that back to yourself slowly, because it is the hinge this whole message turns on. The brook was never the promise. I was the promise. The brook was only the shape provision happened to be wearing for a season, and I let it run dry on purpose. Not because I had finished feeding you, but because I was never going to let you mistake the channel for the source that fills it. If you have ever felt yourself go quietly panicked the moment a reliable thing started thinning out, say so, right where you are, in one word: sent. I want you to notice, over the coming days, how many times in your life something arrived exactly when the old channel ran dry, wearing a shape you would not have picked for yourself, and you were fed anyway. You have also wondered quietly whether there is enough of me to go around, whether the help you keep needing is thinning out some larger supply that other, more deserving people are also drawing from, and whether your turn will eventually stop coming. That fear is older than you are, and it has never once been true. The bird that fed one hidden man twice a day was not the last bird I had. It was not even the first. I am not a well that lowers with use. I am the source the well was drawing from in the first place, and I do not run short the way the ground beneath you sometimes does. I want to bring you back to that man by the ravine, because there is a line about him I have kept for exactly this moment. He did not know, watching a bird land near his feet twice a day, that anyone would ever read about it centuries later. He was not performing faith for a watching crowd. He was simply doing the one thing left to do, which was to stay where I had told him to stay and let the strange provision keep arriving. This is what was written about what he watched happen, morning after morning, evening after evening, in that ravine no one else could see. 1 Kings 17:6. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Read that slowly, because every clause in it answers something you have been carrying. The ravens brought him bread and meat. Not a single dramatic delivery he could frame once and move past, but a pattern, morning and evening, a rhythm he could not have manufactured on his own and was never asked to. Notice, too, what he did not do in that sentence. He did not catch the bird first to inspect its intentions. He did not demand to know why I had chosen a creature he had every religious reason to distrust. He simply ate what arrived, in the shape it arrived in. And he drank from the brook while it still had water left in it, because he was not too proud to receive provision from a source he never would have chosen for himself. Notice also the shape of the timing, morning and evening, not once and finished. I did not hand him a season's worth of bread all at once so he could stop needing me and simply manage the rest himself. I fed him daily, on purpose, because the feeding itself was the relationship, not an inconvenience standing in the way of it. You have sometimes wished I would simply give you enough once so you could stop having to come back and ask. I understand the wish. But the coming back was never the failure of the plan. The coming back was the plan. Every morning he woke up still dependent on a bird he could not summon or control, and every morning the bird came anyway. That is not a design flaw in how I provide. That is the whole design. Look back now at what I told you at the start of this message, that I have a long history of sending exactly what you would never have chosen. This is where that history was first written down, for you to find later. I had already spoken to the ravens before I ever told him where to go and hide. The provision was arranged before the need was even announced, and the same king who once commanded a scavenger bird to feed one frightened man in a ravine has not developed a taste for dignified channels only in all the time since. I still send help wearing the wrong clothes. I still let it arrive through hands you did not expect and would not have picked yourself. The question was never whether I would feed you. The question was only whether you would let yourself be fed by something that embarrassed you along the way. There has always been a particular fondness in me for that bird, if you want to know the truth of it. Long before that ravine, I was already the one who listens to the young raven's cry when it calls out with no one else left to feed it, an unlovely cry from an unremarkable creature. The last thing anyone would expect a king to bend down and notice. If I bend down for the raven itself, do not tell me you believe I would let the one I actually love go hungry simply because the help I sent did not look impressive enough for you to accept it. There is also a part of this that has nothing to do with receiving and everything to do with being hidden, and it deserves its own moment before we go on. You have obeyed me in places no one was watching, and some part of you has quietly kept score the whole time, wondering when the hiding would finally end and the recognition would begin. That man went to a ravine, not a stage. Years passed before anyone besides the birds and the water knew exactly where he was. Being unseen while you are doing precisely what I asked was never a sign that I had forgotten you. It was closer to the opposite. It meant I trusted you with an obedience nobody was clapping for. I have watched you reach for your phone in the middle of a hidden season, wanting to post some careful version of what you are carrying. Not to lie about it exactly, just to make sure someone, anyone, would know it was hard and know you were handling it well. There is nothing shameful in wanting to be seen. I am the one who put that longing in you in the first place. But I want you to hear this clearly. The years by the ravine were not wasted because no one else witnessed them. They were the years I was doing the actual work of feeding you, close enough to watch, when a crowd would only have gotten in the way of how personal the provision needed to be. Place your hand against your own throat and let it rest there for a moment, low, right where a word gathers just before you decide whether it is safe to let it out. That is where the apology has been living, the one you keep quietly rehearsing for needing help, for still being here at all, for not having crossed this stretch of ground on your own strength yet. You do not owe me that apology. You never have. Let your hand stay there long enough to notice that the words are not required of you. Let this part be said plainly, because a fragile hope can do real damage to someone who has already been disappointed before. What is being offered here is not the same work handed back, the hours restored to what they were, or a balance settled by a day you could mark on a calendar in advance. A diagnosis is not guaranteed to lift on anyone's timetable, and a strained relationship is not guaranteed to mend by the season you have been quietly hoping for. Some of what dried up in your life may stay dry a good while longer, or may never refill in the same shape it once had, and this will not be softened just to make the message easier to sit with. But none of what is actually promised waits on any of that shifting first. You will be fed. Not always the way you would have arranged it, not always on the timeline you would have chosen for yourself, but fed the way that man was fed, morning and evening, for as long as the hiding lasted and not one day less. You have also wondered whether needing help this many times proves a flaw in you specifically, some deficiency other. Stronger people simply do not carry. It does not. The man by the ravine needed feeding every single day for as long as the drought lasted, and not one line of what was written about him treats that as weakness. It is only recorded as fact, morning, evening, the way you might describe weather or breathing. Repeated need is not a verdict on your character. It is closer to the plain evidence that you are a creature, made to depend, the way every raven and every prophet and every one of you has always depended on something outside yourself to keep going. Some of your hard season did not come from my hand at all. Part of it is simply what happens when a fragile world, still working itself right, brushes up against an ordinary life. Decisions other people made without ever asking you. Plain misfortune that finds a person no matter how carefully they live. None of that drought needs to be credited to me for the point underneath it to hold true. Whatever gets hidden inside it, every time, without exception, is a way of keeping you fed that you did not design and cannot fully explain, delivered by something or someone you would never have chosen if the choosing had been left up to you. Notice your shoulders for a second. If they have crept up toward your ears while you have been listening, let them drop, just for the length of this next sentence, and nothing more is required of you than that. Breathe in now, and let the breath out slower than it came in, longer, the way a dry stream bed still holds the shape of water long after the water itself has gone, patient, waiting without panic for rain it cannot control the timing of. You have been holding your breath the way a person holds it when they are bracing for a source to disappear completely. Let it go instead. The shape remains even when the flow changes for a season. So do you. Hear this plainly, because the shame has been louder than the truth for a long while now. Needing to be fed by something undignified does not make you less mine. It makes you like nearly every person I have ever kept alive long enough to matter. A fugitive shepherd fed by a father-in-law's flock he did not build himself. A hunted king eating bread. A priest technically had no right to hand him. An entire wandering nation fed by something that fell from the sky overnight and rotted the moment anyone tried to hoard it past its hour. Every one of them ate what they did not earn. from a source they would not have picked, and not one of them lost their place in my story simply because of how the meal happened to arrive. Some of you have been comparing your own hidden feeding to someone else's, and the comparison has only added to the shame. You know a person whose provision always seems to arrive clean, a check that clears on time, a friend with exactly the right connections, help that looks organized and dignified from the outside. You have quietly decided that the messiness of your own provision says something about your standing with me, as if the tidy channel were a reward for better faith and the strange one were a consolation prize. It is not. I have fed prophets from ravens and a whole nation from something that fell out of the sky with no explanation attached, and none of it was ever graded on presentation. The bird that lands at your feet is not a lesser gift than the check that clears on schedule for someone else. It is simply the shape yours took this season. You have worried more than once about becoming known as the person in your circle who always needs something, the one whose name people brace for when it shows up on their phone, the one whose requests start to feel like a pattern instead of an emergency. I want to loosen that fear a little, because it has been doing more damage than you realize. Needing help repeatedly does not automatically make you a burden to the people around you, any more than the ravens found it burdensome to keep flying the same route morning and evening. Some creatures were simply built for the carrying. Some people are too. The fear of becoming too much to the people who love you is worth naming honestly with them, in your own time, rather than solving alone by refusing help before anyone has the chance to grow tired of giving it. Notice the difference between two ways of crossing the same drought, because it changes everything about how the season feels while you are still inside it. One way only asks how quickly the crossing can be finished. The other stays curious the whole way through, wondering what is actually being handed over in this exact moment, however odd the hand extending it looks. Merely surviving lands you on the far side, worn out and empty-handed, simply relieved it is over. Letting yourself be fed carries you across the same ground, holding something new. A gentler read of people's motives, less bookkeeping over who owes whom. A nearness to me that seems to surface nowhere as often as it does in the driest stretches. So here is something small to practice in the days just ahead. Not a technique, just a habit worth trying on purpose. The next time help arrives in a shape that embarrasses you, a favor from someone you barely know, money you did not earn, a kindness you have no clean way to repay, hold still for one breath before deciding whether to accept it. Ask quietly whether the discomfort you feel is really about the help itself, or about the old rule you built long ago that says only certain shapes are allowed to count. You may not feel the shift the first time you ask that question, but by the 10th or the 20th time, you will notice yourself receiving faster, with less apology folded into your hands. And if you are more used to giving than receiving, here is a second small thing to try. The next time you are the one able to help someone else, let the help be a little less tidy than you would normally allow yourself to make it. Do not wait until you have the perfect words, the ideal amount, the most convenient timing. Give what you actually have in whatever shape it currently exists, the way a bird does not wait for a silver tray before it delivers what is already in its beak. You may be the strange-shaped provision someone else has been too proud to hope for. I have been feeding you your whole life through hands you never thought to thank, because you never noticed those hands belonged to me. The relative who called at the exact hour you almost gave up. The song that came on at the exact moment you needed it, from a station you never chose. A passerby's plain decency showing up on the single hardest hour of that stretch. None of it looked like a miracle while it was happening. It looked like a coincidence, or a favor, or a bird landing where you did not expect one to land. I have never once needed you to recognize the delivery for the delivery to still count. Picture, for a moment, the actual taste of bread carried in a bird's beak. Imperfect, probably a little worn from the flight, Nothing like the meal you would have planned for yourself if you had been given the choosing of it. And picture the relief anyway. Real relief. Filling a real hunger. Exactly on time. Exactly enough, morning after morning, until the ordinary rhythm of it stopped feeling like a miracle and simply started feeling like being cared for. That is what I am offering you, underneath everything else in this message. Not a rescue you will tell dramatic stories about later, necessarily. Just bread and meat and water from a brook that has not run dry yet, arriving in a shape you did not choose, for as long as you need it to keep coming. The brook you're watching thin out right now is not the last word on whether you will be fed. It never has been for anyone in any generation. I fed a hidden man with a bird he would have been ashamed to be seen depending on, and I have not lost the habit in all the years since. Let the shape of the help stop being the test you put it through before you accept it. Let the feeding be the test instead, and you will find you have already passed it more times than you ever bothered to count. You are not the one who has to arrange your own rescue for it to count as real. You are not required to approve the shape it comes in before you are allowed to receive it with both hands. You were hidden, not forgotten. You were fed, even on the days the source looked entirely wrong to you. And when the brook you are standing beside finally runs dry, that will not be the end of your story either. It will simply be the sign that the next provision is already on its way, arranged long before you noticed the water was gone. Rest there. There is very likely someone near you carrying the same private rule you have just heard named. Someone gripping a closed hand around help that arrived looking wrong, too proud or too frightened to let it in. You will not talk them out of that rule with an argument, but you can be the raven, plain and unglamorous, that lands near them anyway. No perfect approach is required for that. What matters most is that you let yourself be fed first. Amen. Before you close this, what has the raven looked like in your life? The help you were too proud or too frightened or too embarrassed to call by its real name? Name it plainly in the comments, exactly as it arrived, wrong shape and all. I read what gets left there. And if someone you love has been going without, rather than accept help that looked strange to them, send this along to them.